This One Young World ambassador first came to us at One Young World 2010. He was about to embark on a journey to become the youngest person to reach the North Pole. And why? Because he was only 15 then, but determined to find out more about climate change, and so determined that he skied to the North Pole to take ice samples. Since then, he's returned to the North Pole twice, and since One Young World 2013 became the youngest and the fastest person to ski to both the North and the South Poles. He's spoken at the White House and has become one of the world's most important young voices on climate change. So please welcome returning One Young World Ambassador, Parker Leoto.
Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be back here again for the fifth time at One Young World. I would like to extend a warm welcome to everybody who is attending here today for our session, Now, Not Tomorrow. Our theme is being, seeing, and leading. And also an equally warm welcome to those who are joining us live online on the live stream from wherever you are in the world. The subject of today's session is climate change and leadership. Climate change is one of the few global issues that really affects everybody on the planet. And the scale of the challenge requires us all to act with urgency and ambitious leadership today if our generation is to have a clean, fair, and bright future. So, today we have the incredible privilege of being joined in this session by two distinguished leaders, and I would like to welcome them to the stage. From the elders, we have Mr. Kofi Annan and President Mary Robinson. So, to most of us, they will need no introduction, but to recap, Mr. Annan was the Secretary General of the United Nations from 1997 to 2006, and is now the chair of the Elders. And President Robinson was the President of Ireland from 1990 to 1997, and is now the United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Change. So we're very hopeful that they can inspire the sort of leadership that is required in this century to tackle climate change. So we'll be talking for about half an hour on some of the key issues and also about how we need to be seeing this issue differently, how we need to affect change differently, how we need to be leading in a different way. And then we'll also turn to questions from all of you from the floor. You can also tweet your questions to the hashtag for the session, which is OYW Elders. You can also join, of course, when it's time for questions from the floor. You can go to any one of the microphones in the aisles. So before we get started, we're going to show a short film made by the Elders team that highlights the issue, and I hope that we can all share the road to COP21 in Paris next December. So we have a 3-minute video.
We all talk about climate change. I have a sense that people don't take it seriously.
The effects of global warming and climate change have already started to happen long time ago, and for every new scientific report, the signs are more alarming.
I was working on human rights in Africa and heard, but things were so much worse. And then I realized it was affecting already communities and indeed countries that were least responsible for these carbon emissions. Small island states, indigenous people, many communities in Africa, the Horn of Africa, Liberia, you name it, anywhere in Africa.
when you are an elected leader and responsible for a country or for part of a leadership of a country, you have to be responsible long term. Your actions or your inactions are going to determine the future of the children of your country and the children of other countries.
They should be preparing for Paris in a manner that will yield results when they get there. They should go there to take decisions. They should go there prepared.
I am very afraid that other things being equal, we are going to get something like we got at Copenhagen, at Cancun, at Bali, a nice long declaration with something that at the end doesn't add up to a true international regime to mitigate seriously climate change.
I always choose to be optimistic. I mean, you have to take for granted that more people are more educated, more aware, that they see the signs of destruction and the coming catastrophe ahead of us, and that in fact they will use their wisdom and see their responsibility to, together with others, find the right solutions. I believe it can happen, it should happen, it will happen.
That was a very powerful video, and I'm honored to be able to open this discussion up and start with a question about international leadership. In your decades of experience in international leadership, do you sense that there has been a shift in the way that people and leaders have perceived this issue?
Would you like me to start?
Perhaps you can start,
Okay.
President Robinson. Yeah.
I do actually see a shift. It's come, I think, this year in particular. We've had these very alarming reports of the IPCC, the fifth assessment reports. We've had other reports from other agencies, including in the United States and all around the world, saying this is really serious. And then we had that incredible march in New York of 400,000 people and 1,500 events worldwide. People are mobilizing to get the leaders to come to the table. And I do say that the climate summit that Secretary General Ban Ki-moon organized was incredibly important, because more than 125 heads of state and government came and said what their country was doing, or sometimes they just came and they talked. But some actually made real commitments, and they have to make them this year. And I think we're seeing this shift, and I'm really hopeful that it will mean we'll get a good climate agreement in Paris.
Yeah, no, I agree with Mary, and the fact that they were ready to go to New York when the Secretary General called them to indicate what their countries will do. Some did it, not everybody, what their countries will do. And some of the private sector leaders also indicated what they will do, which means that they've realized that one should not always build it from the top down. We can also build it from the bottom up. So corporations have responsibility. We as individuals, you and me, also have responsibilities in affecting leadership by putting pressure on our leaders to take climate change seriously. Yes, there has been a change, but the pressure has to be maintained.
It's a powerful reminder of our responsibility as individuals in our organizations as well as our personal lives. So if we were to move to the issue of momentum and the upcoming Paris conference at COP21, what can we do now to ensure momentum on climate change between now and the COP21 Paris conference and beyond that as well?
I think we've started the discussions well in the fact that the leaders are beginning to change. Nobody wants to repeat Copenhagen, which everyone sees as a failure. I would want to see a bit more action from Europe. In Copenhagen, Europe was in the lead. They were really ready to move. I have a feeling they've fallen back a bit. And I hope with Paris, they will gear up again and be prepared to deal with other nations to try and come up with an agreement. What I would also suggest is that we as individuals not only keep pressing the governments, but we should encourage private sector to use their innovation, their research resources to really tackle climate change and focus on solutions for the problems that we are going to resolve. And we should also let them know that we as individuals, as customers, as consumers, with our choices, will be putting the pressure on them. We can choose to buy from a company that is green and walk away from one that is not. We are making choices when we buy cars, that we buy cars with lower consumption and all along the line, and really build it into a movement going to Paris that is not just for Paris, but is Paris and beyond. And it will affect the bottom line if leaders do not, the corporate leaders do not pay attention.
Yes, I think it's really important to keep up this momentum. There was real momentum on the 2 days before the climate summit itself. And I very much agree with Kofi. Actually, the next thing is the European Council meeting next week, where they have to decide on the 40% reduction in emissions and the standards both on renewables and on energy efficiency. Because Europe has benefited from fossil fuel. It's a richer part of the world, even though it's not in a very good place at the moment. And it has to show leadership, because then we go to Lima this December for the important conference where we will see the draft text of an agreement. And that's also important. That didn't happen before Copenhagen. The leaders didn't know what they were going to sign in Copenhagen. It was a mess. Now we are going to have a text and a year to negotiate. And in March, we're going to have every country explaining their nationally determined commitments on climate. And we'll see that when we add all that up, it doesn't bring us below 2 degrees Celsius. And then we've got to find ways to increase the ambition. And that's where we mobilize people. And this gathering of young leaders can help to mobilize in their countries. So we put the pressure on the politicians to be more ambitious, because they have to have a proper climate agreement. So we all play our part, as Kofi said.
And ambition is certainly plays an important role. Mr. Annan, you were talking about the role of the private sector. I found it very inspiring to hear the CEO of IKEA talk about his emissions reduction goals for his organization, which were effectively 100% renewable by 2030, I believe. And he was asked, why 100%? Isn't that a little too ambitious? And he said, it's easier to do 100% than 70%. Why do 70% when you can do 100%? So that's very interesting. What do you think is also the role of hope and ambition as we go through Lima? And do you expect that there are reasons to be very, very hopeful for the Paris Accord, including the expectations for the Lima draft? Because I think what we've heard from a lot of leaders recently is, despite the result of Copenhagen, there are reasons to be very hopeful, and we must continue to be hopeful as we move forward in the next couple of years.
It will need real ambition. I've talked about transformative leadership. I think it actually needs that. It'll need pressure from people. Politicians, and we know this, respond to pressure, believe me. And the more pressure, the more they will see that this is what their people want. And it's because so many people now know we don't have a plan B. We only have one world. And we have the decisions next year, both on the Sustainable Development Goals next September and the Climate Agreement in December. So it is going to be very important. I don't believe that we're there yet, but I think there's an inevitability that we have to get this climate agreement. And there's leadership shown by France in hosting this conference. There's leadership shown by Lima in trying to insist that they want a text by the time we get to Lima. And all the time we need the pressure from below, and we need equity, we need fairness. Some of the smallest countries committed. Samoa, a small island that I was in recently with the Secretary General for a small island developing states conference. Samoa has committed to 0 emissions by 2027, I think it is. Costa Rica has committed to 0 emissions. Ethiopia has committed to getting to 0 emissions. And they'll all have to do it with equity and with fairness, a just transition. We haven't heard yet the European Union absolutely commit. We need them to do the 40%, but we need them to know that they, above all, have to get to 0 emissions by 2050.
No, I wanted to, you referred to hope, that one should have. Hope has to be based on some expectation or action. They should take actions that will lead us to hope that they will do the right thing. They cannot expect us to take it on faith, that trust us we will do it. Their actions must speak for them, and this is what we demand of the leaders. And you, the young ones, also have to understand there is an old African proverb which says, the earth is not ours. That is, people my generation, the earth is not ours. It's something we hold in trust for future generations. And we have to be worthy of that trust. And when you feel we are not worthy of it and we are destroying the globe, you should speak up. You are the ones who are going to inherit it. It is your future that we are dealing with. And so for you, it's almost an existential issue that you should take seriously, and don't let the politicians get away with loose promises they have no intention of keeping. And I think I've told some of you before that when the leaders fail to lead, we and you, the people, can make them follow, can lead and make them follow. So don't forget that.
And on the topic of leadership, and also on the intergenerational aspect of climate change, what does all of this require of leaders, young and old? I mean, how can we inspire ethical leadership and moral leadership, and what does it really mean in practice?
I think the intergenerational dimension is incredibly important. It's also very much part of the climate justice approach. I mean, I've talked quite a bit about the impact already of climate on the poorest countries and the poorest communities, but what about future generations? We are using up the carbon budget of the world. We're putting the world in a precarious, unsafe position, and scientists tell us we could reach a point where it's irreversible. And so we have to be very conscious of the importance of intergenerational justice. At a Women Leaders Forum just before the Climate Summit in September, I was very conscious that women have a particular, I suppose, nurturing role, and are very conscious of that. But I think most grandparents are very conscious of grandchildren, and increasingly people are looking at their children and saying, what kind of world will I grow up into? So it's in the convention, and it's very, very important that we obey our sister elder, Gru Brundtland, and her Brundtland report on sustainable development. And as Kofi said, that we hand over the world in as good a state, certainly not in a worse state, than we ourselves inherited it. We're not doing that at the moment. We're not on a safe course. So please, let's hear your voices. Please, let's hear you put the pressure on leaders to do what is needed for our world.
This is an issue for all generations. And as Mary has said, the intergenerational issue is important. But the role of the young as well as the old is extremely important. As I indicated, you are the ones who are going to inherit this globe. But we need to work together. We need to be engaged, and you need to get involved now to be able to take over the leadership when the generational change takes place. But you don't have to wait for that change to act. And this is why I'm happy to see so many of you in this room discussing this issue, because it is a real problem. Climate change is an all-encompassing threat to our way of life, our source of food, our source of fresh water. So we don't have to wait to act. The action must be now. And you will come across people who think we should start tomorrow. Even for those who believe action should begin tomorrow, remind them that tomorrow begins now. Tomorrow begins today. So let's all move forward.
Well, we have so far covered some questions on the three primary topics of this session, seeing, being, leading, and we have some time now for questions from the floor. And I'd like to invite everybody to come to the microphones. I think that they're in the aisles, and there might be some right in the balcony as well. Yeah.
The quicker you can ask your questions, the more time we have for Mr. Annan and Mrs. Robinson to answer them. So if we have an orderly queue behind each mic, and if you just say your name, where you're from, and then your question or comment. And I think Parker will seamlessly run this.
Thank you, David. So I think we have actually, I'm not sure if it's going to be up on the screen, but we have a couple of questions from Twitter, and we might start with one of the questions from Twitter, but apparently not, because it's not on the screen. So why don't we start with the front left side microphone here, if you're ready.
Hi, I'm Astrid. I'm from Peru, and my question is about some governments like mine are not taking seriously the fight against illegal mining that contaminates rivers, lands, water. How can we help to fight against this if the authorities that should look after this will look away just because they're getting paid for it under the table? And also another comment is regarding the COP20 that will be taking in Lima. I'm so unhappy to know that as a country, we're not doing enough. People in Lima and in Peru don't know about COP20. We are not communicating, we're not letting people know what's going to happen. So if we're having an event that's that important, why are we not communicating enough so everyone can get involved with this? Thank you.
Well, I'm going to be at COP20, and I'm a little bit shocked when you tell me that people don't know, because I remember when we were going to the COP in Durban in South Africa, everybody on the African continent pretty well knew there was going to be an African COP. So you're the young leader. You have to now spread the word and make it clear, and then you'll have a lot of civil society coming who can learn about issues about mining and problems and lend their voices as well to those issues. It's very important that this is a very participatory COP. That's what the message that the Peruvian government have been giving us, that they want wide participation in preparation for Paris next year. So hopefully there will be a lot of spreading of the word in the coming months.
We will try at least.
Is there, Mr. Annan, would you like to?
No, I just wanted to say that on the question of the mining destroying the source of fresh water and all that, in 1999, we came up with Global Compact. Mary and I worked on it with 9 principles for companies. We added a 10th one, the fight against corruption. It included environmental issues, human rights, and core labor standards, where the governments were supposed to come up with rules for companies to obey, even though I believe a company doesn't have to wait for a national law to know that you don't pollute the lake that provides fresh water for the population. But here is a government that is doing it. If it's a government that is a mining company, a government company.
Actually, they are illegal miners. They don't have a company. They do.
Oh, they are illegal miners. They are illegal. I mean, they're obviously the government has to take action and make sure that they stop them. And if they don't, I think you as citizens of Peru can organize and put pressure on them. You saw what happened in India, for example, when a politician went into the streets to fight, demonstrate against corruption, which has existed for so many years. The government suddenly found the courage to come up with the right laws and to take action. And if the government is not acting, you are here, go back home, organize a few people, and let them know you mean business.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you very much. Philip from France and Australia. I can't help but notice, but all these summits we do have to always include everybody, all 193 member states. Should there be maybe some thought on the merit of more local agreements, that instead of incorporating all 193 states where if a handful says no and pull out, the whole thing falls apart, and maybe something more local? I'm not thinking country level, I'm thinking group of countries, 40 countries, or maybe a North Atlantic climate change agreement, or something that is more relevant to the zone in question, because often climate change is linked to energy, which is much more local than we think, and when we think climate change, we think more global. So my question is there merit to something like COP20, but more local, so that countries can actually work in a way that helps each other out more?
It's an interesting suggestion, but there are a couple of problems with that. If you go the local approach, some local players will tell you this is a global issue. By going local, we are giving advantage to others around the world who are not going to do it. If you go the other way and you say, let's identify a small group of countries who can act on our behalf, take decisions, and we can all agree, that will be you would discover on this issue, because everybody would want to be there. They would not trust another country, not even Australia or France, would trust another country to take such a big decision for them or to come with recommendation. But what I think could work is the pattern which seems to be emerging from the conference Mary was at in New York, where governments are being asked to come up with what you are able to do. China came up with a good plan. President Obama is coming up with something that he can do without getting blocked in Congress. And the companies are beginning to do it. And in fact, when they realize that even before a global agreement, it makes good business sense to come up with innovation, begin greening the economy, you will see lots of activities going on, and eventually maybe one can then aggregate it and come up with some global approach. But to leave it to a group of countries, I don't see many countries accepting that.
Could I just add very briefly that, in fact, I think the planning for Paris is very comprehensive. There are 4 pillars to what is being planned to be realized in Paris. The top pillar is the legally binding agreement, and that will keep us below 2 degrees Celsius. That'll be the kind of commitment. And then you will have the nationally determined commitments as the second pillar that will be agreed next March, when every country will say what they're going to do. And then the next one is finance and technology. The importance of the Green Climate Fund and getting more commitments to that. And we need more money for adaptation and for trust and for fairness in the system. And the last one is all of the mobilization. Kofi talked about business. I was actually at a conference, a World Summit of the Regions on Climate, organized by France just last week. And it was very good. We had regions and sub-regions. We had California, the 8th largest economy, but a state of the United States going far further than the rest of the United States under good leadership of successive governors. And former Governor Schwarzenegger was there at the Paris conference. And actually, regions and sub-regions and cities are terribly important for climate, because very important decisions will be taken. But I do agree with Kofi, we have to have a fair international agreement, because the small island states need their voice heard, and Bangladesh needs its voice heard. And we need to hear those countries that are really suffering, so that they get a fair, equitable, robust climate agreement that is legally binding in Paris.
Thank you, President Robinson. We're going to take a question from Twitter now. So we have the hashtag OIWElders, and this question is from Chidza Sekidza in Harare. The question is, how is Africa supposed to balance its need for economic growth and remain committed to sustainable environmental management?
Yeah, I think that there's a fallacy here. Lots of people think if you take measures against climate change, it's going to impact on your growth. I think you can green the economy and still grow. It doesn't have to be either or. Initially, there will be periods of adjustments, which requires adaptation and some financing that Mary has referred to. But there are scientists and financial people today who will tell you that the greening of the economy can have as much impact as the Industrial Revolution if we approach it right, creating quite a lot of jobs and others. But for Africa in particular, I think we have a possibility, if the system is fair and technology and innovation is shared, for us to frog leap some of the dirty practices others had to go through to develop. We've done it in the communication area, where with telephones, the fastest growing region is Africa. We may be able to do the same in other areas. And in fact, my big challenge to scientists is for them to come up with a source of clean energy for the poor, so that they don't have to cut the trees for charcoal, they protect the environment. And I've been teasing the Nobel group that the scientist who comes up with that cheap source of energy for the poor must be given 2 Nobel Prizes at once.
Okay, I think we could take a couple of questions from the balcony now, maybe on the right to begin with. My right, sorry.
My name is Adam. I come from Thailand. As we are in Ireland, I'd like to share with you a quote from an Irishman about our elders. In Sailing to Byzantium, W.B. Yeats writes, "An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap his hands and sing louder for every tear on his mortal dress. I believe our defeats, the tears in our mortal dress, define us. Can you share with us today your greatest defeats before you became the world figure that you are? And how did you rise above the experience?"
You want to go first?
Well, I can certainly say that I was defeated twice trying to get a seat in the lower house of the Parliament. I was elected to the Irish Senate by the University constituency of Trinity College Dublin at the age of 25, and I had served for about 10 years in the Senate, and I decided to try and deepen my political engagement. So I stood in a constituency, and the first time it wasn't so bad, I was narrowly defeated. The second time I was heavily defeated, not least because I had just had a baby, and the baby was coming with me, and I had to make sure there was somewhere I could place the baby to feed in the constituency. It didn't work. And I was very upset by those defeats until I kind of dug deep and thought to myself, that's not the kind of politician I am. I'm actually not a real politician. I'm an issues person. And I'll find a way to talk about issues. And when I was elected President of Ireland, it was an ideal position from which to work hard, and having learned from the mistakes and defeats, if you like, to benefit from a position that wasn't about real power, but that was about moral authority. And what I love about the work we try to do as elders, it's also about moral authority, about trying to be very close to people, amplify their voices, and then speak truth to power. You know, that's a very important thing for the elders to do, is to speak truth to power.
Very inspiring story. Mr. Annan?
Yeah, no, I'll share 2 experiences with you. I think the first one, which was I was a young man in my 20s, and I wanted to take a year off. Not that I was going to goof. I was going to take a year off and do graduate work. My boss told me, "We have a very important conference coming up. We need you. So postpone it to next year." I did. I went to him the following year and said, no, you are not going anywhere. And, and that was the first time an elderly person had disappointed me. So I was very upset. And I said, I thought we had an understanding. And if this is the case, I'm going to go. I'm prepared to resign, and I will not work for you again. So I left. And I had a wife and a child. And people, and then we moved on. I moved on. And then when it was to go to the Sloan School at MIT. And when I got there, also, we had lots of fun. But it was people who have graduated, worked for about 10 years, and picked up by their companies to come on this program. Very aggressive, very competitive, very pushy. And we all got caught in this crazy competition. And one day I was walking along the Charles River and I asked myself, and this is something I'm sure you'll be doing as you go forward, why am I caught in this crazy competitive thing that we are all rushing around trying to be a big leader, prove we were better, and then said to myself, came to the conclusion, and those are the moments I consider sort of moments of blessed inspiration, saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do it my way. I will march according to the inner drummer I hear. I will follow my inner compass, do it at my speed and my pace, and let them run around. And that was also quite an experience, Yeah.
Well, I think we've been able to understand the importance of staying true to yourself and of course, speaking truth to power, as you said, President Robinson. I think we have one more question from Twitter, and we'll have probably time for one or two more questions from the floor after this Twitter question. So the question comes from Angelique in Dublin, and right here with us, I suppose. And she says, our method of consumption is having negative effects on the environment. How do we make people conscious consumers? So.
I really think that's a very good question for all of us, because this is an issue that we have to take responsibility for. We have to eat less meat or no meat. We have to be careful how we travel. We have to be intelligent consumers and ensure that what we're buying is energy efficient. We have to try to get into recycling everything, because we cannot afford to have the waste. We have to try to kind of make this a priority issue in our family, in our communities, in our schools, everywhere. And I like a project in Australia, the 1 Million Women Project, where a few years ago, ordinary housewife women and women in the media and lawyers and that got together, and they said, we want to have 1 million women in Australia commit to reducing our emissions, because that will matter. And I think if we could have more of that, a bit of ambition about what we can do as consumers. You're good at linking with each other. You're already linking, those of you who are working on providing energy to poor communities in various parts of the world, and I hope that has worked at lunchtime. You can also link as consumers. Decide you will not buy products. There are students who are active in diversifying out of fossil fuel, getting their universities to diversify, getting foundations to diversify. It's not enough to diversify. You also should be pressurizing for investment in renewables. Diversifying in its own way is not climate justice. You have to reinvest in renewable energy and then make that technology available to African countries and other parts of the world. So I think we need the engagement, not just the voice and mobilization, but the engagement of all of us. We all have to change our habits. I'm an elder, and I'm afraid I like paper. I'm the most paper person in my office. All my younger colleagues don't use paper anymore. They're looking at me and saying, you're supposed to be leading this foundation, and you're still using paper. And it's interesting. We can influence each other. And I think we all have to learn from each other, actually. And we do have to be more serious about it. So it's a really very good question.
Let me just add one little word to what Mary has said. I think all of us buy products and gadgets. And in some ways, I'm myself included, we are often manipulated to buy things we don't need. Companies create needs, come with products, and convince us we need it. And sometimes after we bought it and we go home, we say, but why did I buy this? We should act in a way that we encourage companies and scientists to come up with products that satisfy real needs, offer solutions, not to sort of create a need that is good to change your phone or your iPad every or the year or 2 years. So let's focus on what is useful, what is solution-oriented, what we genuinely need, not because the marketers are telling us we need it.
And what lasts long.
And will last long. Good.
One last question, and we'll take it from the top left-hand corner there.
Hi, I'm Niwa from Indonesia, where from the March 2014, even until now, we still have been dealing with the issue of forest fires. The haze not only devastate the education and health, but also even some of the delegates here are having trouble with it coming to Dublin because of the haze. And also, on the other hand, the president has a very good commitment to reduce the emission 41% by 2025. We applaud this commitment. But my question is more about the social inclusion and the global leadership. As this is a very rare opportunity for us to meet with you with such a global leader, how do you think the all youth activism, the all civil society organization movement, do you think that really engage the global leaders? I mean, in terms of, do you think the global leaders make it into something that is really considered, or it's just making it something that appear to be inclusive? I mean, when we are not talking in General Assembly, like only between the national and political leader, do you think they talk about this very seriously and taking into account all the aspirations?
Well, I love your question, because that's the climate justice approach, to be more inclusive, to listen to people who know the situation on the ground. We had a conference, my foundation organised a conference with the Irish government 2 years ago here in Dublin, when Ireland had the presidency of the European Union. And it was a conference on hunger, nutrition, climate justice. And 100 of the 300 participants came from grassroots communities around the world. And it was a very, very telling conference, because you had commissioners from European countries, government ministers from European countries, Irish government ministers, sitting with grassroots communities and for once listening. And afterwards, they all said how impressive a conference it was, because they were hearing the realities on the ground. And one of the participants said something that I always remember, because there was a lot of, we must think outside the box. And this woman said, we in the grassroots community, we don't have to think outside the box because we don't think in boxes. It was a very good answer. We have all these problems coming at us in one way, and we need much more understanding that climate is affecting our water, it's affecting our food security. We also have problems of violence, we have problems of poverty, and all of these are related. And we need a more inclusive approach, a different narrative about climate change going towards Paris, which is why the regions, the sub-regions, the cities, the civil society in particular, has to be involved and has to be included, and has to be in Lima before Paris, so that we have a more inclusive approach. I think it's really vital to getting a fair, equitable, a robust legal agreement in Paris. It has to reflect the realities of how much climate is affecting different communities in different parts of the world.
So that's about the 45 minutes that we have. I would like to just, first of all, give President Robinson and Mr. Annan just an opportunity to have closing statements, if you'd like to add or finish with any particular thoughts.
Well, I'm going to be very brief, because I spoke earlier, and I think we should listen to Kofi. I was very taken in the conversation earlier today on climate justice by the number of ideas that you had in this summit. And there were ideas about creating a market for access to energy for poor communities, about using social protection systems, about linking together so that you're able to actually draw on each other's experience and maybe work across countries doing similar work. This is the kind of solidarity at a kind of people level that we need going forward on climate change. And we needed to be hopeful. That, as I mentioned, there was this new climate economy report which said, as Kofi has said, every country, it's in every country's interest now to take action on climate. And countries are different. There's not one size fits all. But every country should be doing it. And it has to be done at all the levels. It has to be done by the business sector. It has to be done by civil society. It has to be done by regions. It has to be done by cities. And it has to be done by pressure on the national government to bring all that together as the national commitments in March going forward. So you have a big role to play on climate. I'm sorry to sort of really focus on this because I know you have other issues that you've come here to discuss, but for the next 15 months, it's the biggest issue, Sustainable Development Goals and the climate agreement. So please, 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 do your very best because we need you. Thank you.
Mr. Annan?
I think our discussions this afternoon, as Mary has said, reveals that there's room for action and there's a lot that each and every one of us can do. And at all levels, in our schools, in our communities, in our relations with business, in our relations with our politicians, we tend sometimes to focus on what the leaders do when they go to these conferences. And we expect so much out of it and we get disappointed. But we can put fire under their feet by doing some of the things that Mary has indicated. You can begin in your community. You can begin to put pressure on companies by the choices you make and what you decide to buy or not buy. You can begin to let the politicians know that this issue is important for you and it will count at the time of the elections, and try and keep it up, the political agenda high up there. Tell them you know they are going to Paris and you expect them to come back with an agreement. Let them know that they cannot take your future away. It is your future they are playing with. I've lived. I'm an old man at 76. And so quite a lot of the people going maybe will be at the same age, but it's your future. And this is why your voices must be heard. You should really, really sustain that engagement and maintain the pressure on those who will need to come with the agreement. Thank you.
So, thank you so much.
I have a question for you, Parker. From what you've heard from us, it's not my generation, but it's your generation that is going to be really impacted by climate change. You are a good ambassador for climate change. How easy or difficult it is for you to get heard? How do you feel your voice is heard when you talk for your generation on this all-important issue?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think it's easier for our generation, more than any other before us, to make our voices heard on climate change. And that, I think, is really critical because, in my view, it gives us a responsibility. And it's an opportunity, I think. And we've talked a lot about hope today. We've talked about ambition. We've talked about justice. We've talked about the private sector, individual actions, lots of different topics. And all of us have the ability to make our voices heard, to put pressure on leaders, to make people understand that we know that this is an important topic, that we absolutely need to get it right in Lima and then in Paris. And I think most critically, it's not unrealistic for people that are 16, 17, 18, 20, 25, 30 years old to have a real voice in this discussion. And I think that, for me, I'm incredibly grateful to be part of a generation that has that opportunity. It was a giant stroke of luck that I was born in the 21st century and not in the 1800s. With that, thank you so much for... Well, that's right, actually. You need to hold me accountable for what I've been saying.
You have a
20th century, close to the 21st century. I wish I was 14.
No, but well done.
Thank you. With that, thank you for correcting me. With that, I'd like to close the session and it's been an incredible honor to have you here, President Robinson and Mr. Annan. It's just really an opportunity that doesn't come very often, and I'm hoping that all of you here today and all of the people watching online will be able to use this discussion moving forward and to make their voices heard. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your day and your afternoon.
And if you'd like the opportunity to do what Park has done and be able to interview two of the greatest statespeople in the world, all you need to do is become the fastest person in history to ski to the South Pole and plant a One Young World flag there. It's been a huge, huge honor. We'll be saying goodbye to Mrs. Robinson, and Mr. Annan will be back tomorrow. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow. I know, like you.